tens of thousands of protesters, government plans to overhaul the judiciary imperil democracy in Israel. And these aren't only left-wingers or political rivals of Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right coalition government. They include much of the country's elite. The last 10 living former Israeli Air Force chiefs and over 100 members, some very senior, of the country's elite military intelligence special operations division are against the reforms. Some volunteers, including a prized squadron of F-16 fighter pilots, have threatened to stop showing up for duty in protest. A prospect which raises fears at a time of high tensions, both with Iran and between Israelis and Palestinians.
If those pilots don't volunteer, this is a real threat, and it really undermines the ethos of the IDF, but also the competency of Israel to perform of the IDF to perform its missions right now. And I think the head of the army, who, by the way, was an ex-officer of mine under my command, is very worried right now, because he really has to see that he doesn't lose the reserves.
Many top business people, especially in the tech sector, also strongly oppose the legal reforms. In response to the mass protests and widespread criticism, Benjamin Netanyahu argues that he's the one upholding democracy, on the grounds that his coalition, not meddling Supreme Court judges, won last November's election, so it's carrying out the will of the people. An argument that millions of Israelis, some of whom have staged counter-protests, support.
I think that the Prime Minister is carrying out the will of the people. 64 of the 120 members of Parliament support these reforms in the legislation with regard to the judiciary, and 64 is the majority. And the alternative would be to say that the 56 are those who represent the will of the people, which is obviously not the case. This is what parliamentary democracies are all about.
The recent increase in violent attacks by Jewish settlers has followed the controversial appointment of several ministers who've expressed extremist views, such as calls for the full annexation of the occupied West Bank and the expulsion of Arab citizens seen as lacking loyalty to Israel. In the face of some international alarm, Prime Minister Netanyahu has insisted that his hands remain firmly on the steering wheel. But are they? After all, he could lose power if his coalition partners think he's ignoring their wishes.
I think he's a prisoner, metaphorically. He's a prisoner in the hands of the very radical right. So obviously his job is to say, no, guy, don't worry, everything is under control. But, if I was, a foreign government looking at its relationships with Israel these days, I would be very, very worried.
Who do you think is going to win the argument between these two sides, pro and against the reforms? And what do you see as the consequences of whoever wins?
Unfortunately, I think that we are going towards apartheid. We are going towards very right-wing policies in all spheres of public life. And I say it, with all my sentiments, again, to Israel, to my friends and families there. I think, that's where it goes.
After 5 elections in 4 years, some say democracy in Israel was already struggling, with a deepening schism running through Israeli society. Fears have been expressed in the country's press that the row could spill over into violence and even civil war. A worry some, with much experience of conflict, don't lightly dismiss.
People talk like this. I don't want to imagine such a possibility. I think when I talk with friends on the two sides of the aisles, I feel that in the end, in the last moment, people would back off.
So far, the mass protests have remained peaceful. The hope is they'll stay that way if compromise can eventually win the day.